My name is Vanessa Cole. I'm 35 years old. My daughter Lily is 7 and profoundly deaf. Last Thanksgiving, my aunt pulled me aside 20 minutes before the family photo and told me, quietly, that Lily wouldn't be in it this year. Her hearing aids don't match the color scheme, she said. And honestly, she ruins the aesthetic. We're doing this one for the wall, Vanessa. You understand. I didn't understand. I still don't. What my aunt didn't know was that the photographer she'd hired for the day had been standing close enough to hear every word, and that woman was about to become the reason this story didn't end the way my family expected it to. Her silent revenge stories. If you've ever watched someone treat your child like an inconvenience instead of a person, comment "not okay" below. This one's for you. Lily was born profoundly deaf, diagnosed at 3 days old through the standard newborn hearing screening, a diagnosis that landed on my husband Ryan and me like a wave neither of us fully understood how to process at the time. Neither of us had any experience with deafness, no family history, no prior exposure to deaf culture or American Sign Language, just 2 exhausted new parents and a piece of paper telling us our daughter's world would sound different from ours. What followed was years of early intervention, learning ASL alongside her, researching cochlear implants and ultimately deciding, as a family, that Lily would grow up bilingual, ASL as her first language, spoken English and lip reading as tools she'd develop alongside it, with hearing aids that helped her access some environmental sound without being the centerpiece of how she experienced the world. Lily, now 7, is sharp, funny, and remarkably unbothered by things that used to worry me constantly on her behalf. She has a best friend at her school for the deaf named Maya, the 2 of them signing to each other so fast during playdates that I sometimes have to ask them to slow down so I can follow along. She loves dinosaurs with the specific, encyclopedic passion only a 7-year-old can sustain, and she has a laugh that comes from somewhere deep in her chest, unself-conscious in a way I hope she never loses. Her hearing aids are purple, her choice, picked out herself at the audiologist's office 2 years ago from a color chart, chosen specifically, she told me at the time, so everyone can see them and know I'm not being rude if I don't answer right away. I think about that sentence often. My 7-year-old had already, on her own, figured out how to advocate for herself in a hearing world before I'd fully figured out how to do it for her. I remember the specific day she made that choice, sitting in the audiologist's office, running her finger along the color chart, weighing purple against a more discreet skin tone option the audiologist had also offered. Why not the ones that blend in? I'd asked her, genuinely curious rather than steering her toward either choice. She'd thought about it with the same seriousness she brings to most decisions, then said, if people can see them, they'll remember I'm deaf. If they forget, they get mad when I don't hear them. I don't want people mad at me for something that's not my fault. I hadn't expected that level of self-awareness from a 5-year-old, and it stayed with me since, a reminder that Lily has been doing the work of managing other people's expectations of her almost since she could form full sentences. I come from a large extended family on my mother's side, 5 siblings, my mother included, spread across 3 states, with a tradition of gathering every Thanksgiving at my Aunt Denise's house, the oldest sibling and the one who'd taken on, over the years, the role of organizing nearly everything the extended family did together. Denise is, by most measures, generous and involved. She remembers every birthday, hosts every major holiday, and has genuinely shown up for our family in ways that matter, financially and otherwise, more than once over the years. She's also, and I say this with real affection alongside real frustration, someone with a very specific vision of how things should look, a vision that had started, in recent years, to extend to the annual family photo she'd begun hiring a professional photographer for. The photo itself had become something of a production over the past 3 years, Denise coordinating outfits in advance, a muted color palette she'd send around weeks ahead of time, a hired photographer who'd spend nearly an hour posing 40-some family members in her backyard before Thanksgiving dinner even started. I want to be honest that I'd found the whole production a little much in years past, though I'd never said so directly. It felt like exactly the kind of thing you let go, in a large family, in favor of the parts that actually mattered, the food, the company, the specific chaos of that many cousins in one house. I never imagined the photo itself would become the site of anything that actually needed to be confronted. Looking back, there had been smaller versions of this dynamic in the years before that Thanksgiving, small enough at the time that I'd absorbed each one without fully naming it as part of a pattern. 2 years earlier, at a cousin's graduation party, Denise had suggested, gently, that maybe Lily didn't need to sign so much at the table during a group photo, worried it would look distracting in candid shots. I'd brushed it off at the time, telling myself Denise simply didn't understand that ASL wasn't something Lily could switch off the way a hearing person might lower their voice. It was her language, as natural to her as English was to the rest of us, and asking her to sign less at a table was, in effect, asking her to participate less in her own family's conversation. The year before that, Denise had asked, while planning a cousin's wedding, whether Lily would need anything special to be comfortable at the reception, in a tone that made the question feel less like practical accommodation planning and more like a subtle accounting of the extra consideration Lily's presence required, as though her needs were a cost to be weighed rather than an ordinary part of including her. I hadn't connected these moments to each other at the time. Each one, on its own, felt small enough to let go, generous enough in its framing that pushing back seemed like it would make me the difficult one rather than Denise. It was only standing in that kitchen, hearing the words "she ruins the aesthetic" spoken plainly for the first time, that I understood how long this specific thread had actually been running underneath the surface of our family's gatherings. Thanksgiving morning, Ryan, Lily, and I arrived at Denise's house around 11, in time for the photo, which Denise had scheduled deliberately early, before the cooking got underway and before anyone's outfit had a chance to get wrinkled or stained. Lily was excited that morning in the specific way she gets excited about family gatherings. She loves her cousins, loves the noise and motion of a full house, even though I know, from years of watching her navigate hearing spaces, that a room full of 40 talking, overlapping people is exhausting for her in ways most of my hearing relatives never think to consider. She'd picked her own outfit that morning, a soft green dress that happened to coordinate nicely, without any coaching from me, with the sage and cream palette Denise had circulated weeks earlier. She was doing what she always does at these gatherings, watching faces closely, reading lips where she could, signing with the 3 or 4 cousins who'd bothered to learn basic ASL over the years, patient in a way that still, sometimes, breaks my heart a little to watch, because I know how much effort it takes her to stay present in rooms built entirely around sound. I had no reason, walking into that backyard, to expect anything about that morning to be different from any other Thanksgiving photo session we'd sat through before. About 20 minutes before the photographer was set to begin, Denise found me in the kitchen, where I was helping arrange a vegetable tray, and asked if she could talk to me for a second, privately, out on the back porch. I remember the specific, careful tone of her voice, the tone people use when they've already decided something and are simply looking for the least confrontational way to deliver it. "I wanted to talk to you about the photo," she said, once we were alone. "I think, this year, we're going to do it without Lily." I asked her, genuinely confused, why. "Her hearing aids," Denise said, gesturing vaguely near her own ears. "They're purple, Vanessa. They're going to stand out against everyone else's outfits, and I put a lot of thought into the color scheme this year. I want this one to actually look nice, for the wall, you know? We can get individual shots of her separately, later, if you want. I just don't want her aids throwing off the whole composition." I stood there for a moment, genuinely unsure I'd heard her correctly, though I had, and she wasn't finished. "And honestly," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, as though this were a kindness rather than an escalation, "she ruins the aesthetic a little, with the signing and the way she kind of stares at people's mouths sometimes. It reads a little strange in photos. I just want one clean, normal-looking picture this year, Vanessa. You understand." "What do you mean, normal-looking?" I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. "I just mean, you know, a picture where everyone's looking at the camera the same way, smiling the same way," Denise said, apparently not hearing, or not registering, how the word normal landed against everything she'd just said about my daughter. "Lily's always kind of doing her own thing in photos. Looking at people's mouths, signing to someone off to the side. It's sweet, honestly, in person. It just doesn't photograph the way I want this one to photograph. She's not doing her own thing, I said. She's reading lips because that's how she accesses spoken conversation. She's signing because that's her language. You're describing my daughter communicating as though it's a quirk she should suppress for a photo. Denise's expression shifted, a flicker of genuine surprise, as though she hadn't considered that framing before. I didn't think about it that way, she said. I just meant it doesn't look like everyone else. She's not supposed to look like everyone else, I said. She's supposed to look like herself. That's the whole point of a family photo, isn't it? Showing the family as it actually is? I asked Denise, directly, whether she'd considered simply adjusting the color scheme instead, choosing a palette that would work with Lily's purple hearing aids rather than treating the aids themselves as the problem to be solved. She paused, and I watched her actually consider the question for the first time, in a way that told me it genuinely hadn't occurred to her before. I guess I could have done that, she said slowly. I didn't think of it as something I could build around. I thought of it as something I needed to work around. That distinction, building around Lily versus working around her, sat with me for the rest of that conversation, and honestly, for a long time afterward. It captured, more precisely than almost anything else Denise said that morning, exactly what had gone wrong in her thinking. Lily wasn't an obstacle in the plan. She was supposed to be part of it, the same as every other child in that yard that day. You've built the whole photo around aesthetic choices every single year, I said. Outfits, backdrop, timing. You could have built it around her exactly as easily. You just didn't think to. I want to describe, honestly, what happened in the several seconds after Denise finished speaking, because I think the gap between what I felt and what I actually said in that moment matters to the rest of this story. What I felt was a specific, physical kind of anger I don't experience often, a hot, immediate flush that started somewhere in my chest and moved outward, the particular fury of hearing your child described as a compositional flaw, a thing that ruined something rather than a 7-year-old girl who had gotten dressed that morning, excited to be with her family. What I said, in that first moment, was nothing. I stood there, genuinely searching for words large enough to hold what I was feeling, and finding, instead, only a kind of stunned silence that I think Denise mistook, briefly, for acquiescence. I know it sounds harsh, she added, into that silence, but I really do think it'll be a better photo without the distraction. You get it, right? I did not get it. But before I could find the words to say so, I noticed something that changed the entire shape of what happened next. Standing just inside the sliding glass door, close enough that I realized, with a sudden cold clarity, she must have heard most of the conversation, was the photographer Denise had hired, a woman I'd been introduced to briefly that morning, named Sarah, setting up a tripod near the door in preparation for the session. Sarah's expression, when I looked over and caught her eye, told me everything. She wasn't pretending she hadn't heard. She was standing very still, her jaw tight, looking at Denise with an expression I can only describe as barely restrained. Denise, following my gaze, seemed to register Sarah's presence for the first time, and I watched a flicker of something, not quite embarrassment, but an awareness that she'd been overheard by someone outside the family, cross her face before she recovered her composure. Sarah, sorry, family stuff, Denise said, with a small, dismissive laugh, clearly hoping to move past the moment entirely. Sarah didn't laugh. She set down the camera bag she'd been holding, straightened up, and said, in a clear, even voice that carried across the kitchen, I actually need to say something, if that's okay. I want to be honest that I hadn't expected anyone outside my family to intervene in that moment. I'd been so focused on my own shock, my own scramble for words, that I hadn't fully processed Sarah's presence as anything beyond an awkward witness. I do a lot of family photography, Sarah said, addressing Denise directly, though her voice was calm rather than confrontational. And I need to tell you honestly, I'm not comfortable photographing a family portrait that deliberately excludes a child. I heard what you said about her hearing aids, and about the aesthetic thing. I don't think I can be part of that, professionally or otherwise. Denise's face went through several rapid shifts, surprise, then defensiveness, then something closer to genuine discomfort as she seemed to hear, for the first time, how her own words sounded coming back at her through someone else's voice. I didn't mean it like that, Denise said. I just wanted the photo to look a certain way. It's not personal. It's extremely personal, Sarah said, still calm, still even. You're talking about excluding a 7-year-old from a family photo because of a piece of medical equipment she needs to hear the world. I have a nephew who's autistic, and I've heard versions of this conversation before, dressed up in different language. I know what it sounds like when someone's trying to make exclusion sound reasonable. I'm not going to help make that photo happen. The kitchen had gone quiet enough, by that point, that several other relatives had drifted in from the living room, drawn by the specific stillness that happens when everyone can sense something significant is unfolding without yet knowing exactly what. My mother arrived first, then my Uncle Gary, then my cousin Ashley, all of them taking in the scene, me standing rigid near the vegetable tray, Denise flushed and increasingly flustered, Sarah standing her ground near the sliding door. Ryan came in from outside, where he'd been helping Denise's husband set up chairs, and I watched his face change the moment he read the room, moving instinctively to stand beside me. What's going on? My mother asked, looking between us. I found my voice, finally, in that moment, the specific clarity that sometimes arrives only once you're no longer the only person in the room who knows what's happening. Denise just told me Lily's not going to be in the family photo this year, I said, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. Because her hearing aids don't match the color scheme. Because she ruins the aesthetic. I watched the words land across the kitchen, watched several faces shift in real time, my mother's mouth actually falling open slightly, Ashley's hand coming up to cover her own mouth, Gary going very still in the specific way people go still when they're deciding how to respond to something they weren't prepared for. I didn't mean it the way it sounds, Denise said again, her voice rising slightly, defensive now in front of an audience she clearly hadn't anticipated. I just wanted one nice photo. We can take other pictures of Lily separately, plenty of them. I'm not trying to hurt anyone. I just think the aids are distracting in a formal shot, and the way she looks at people when she's reading lips, it can look strange to people who don't understand what she's doing. I was trying to be practical, not cruel. There's no version of she ruins the aesthetic that's practical instead of cruel, Denise, my mother said, finding her own voice, sharper than I'd heard her use with her older sister in years. She's 7. She's your great niece. You're talking about her like she's a stain on a tablecloth. I wasn't trying to, Denise started. I know what you were trying to do, my mother said. You were trying to make the photo look a certain way, and Lily didn't fit that picture, so you decided she could just be edited out of the day itself. I don't care how carefully you phrase that. That's what happened. My cousin Ashley, who'd been standing near the doorway through most of this, quiet, spoke up unexpectedly. I need to say something too, she said, her voice unsteady. Denise mentioned this to me last week, when she was planning the photo. She asked if I thought it would look busier with Lily's aids in it. I said I didn't think it mattered. I should have said more than that. I should have told her it was a bad idea instead of just kind of shrugging it off. I hadn't known this, that the decision hadn't been made in a single moment that morning, but planned, discussed, considered in advance, with at least one other family member aware of it beforehand and choosing not to push back. You knew about this a week ago? I asked Ashley, unable to keep the hurt out of my voice. I didn't think she'd actually go through with it, Ashley said. I thought it was just Denise thinking out loud, the way she does about everything with these photos. I didn't think it would turn into an actual conversation with you, this morning, right before we were supposed to take the picture. I'm sorry, Vanessa. I should have said something the moment she brought it up to me. I appreciated the honesty, even as it added a new layer of hurt to the morning, the understanding that this hadn't been a single lapse in judgment, but a plan that had existed, quietly, for at least a week, with more than one person aware of it and choosing silence. I hadn't realized, until I turned around, that Lily had come into the kitchen at some point during the conversation, standing near the doorway with Ryan's hand resting protectively on her shoulder, her eyes moving between the adults' faces with the specific, careful attentiveness she brings to any room where she can tell something important is happening, even when she can't hear all of it directly. She couldn't have heard most of the conversation, the room was too full, too many people talking over each other, exactly the kind of auditory chaos she's had to learn to navigate her whole life through lip reading and context rather than sound. But she could read faces, and the faces in that kitchen told her enough. She looked up at me and signed, simply, "What's wrong?" I knelt down to her level, the way I always do when something matters enough that I want her getting my full face, my full attention, rather than trying to catch pieces of it from a standing adult's angle. I signed back, choosing my words carefully, the way I'd learned to over years of trying to be honest with her without handing her more than a 7-year-old should have to carry. Some grown-ups made a mistake about the photo. "We're fixing it." She considered that for a moment, then signed, "Because of my ears?" I want to be honest that this question, more than anything Denise had said, was the moment that broke something open in me completely, the specific, devastating clarity of realizing my 7-year-old had already, on some level, understood exactly what was happening, without anyone needing to spell it out for her in words. I stood back up, and I want to describe what I said next as calmly as I actually said it, because I think the calm mattered more than any anger would have. "Lily just asked me if this was about her ears," I said, looking directly at Denise. "She's 7, and she already understood what you were trying to do without anyone explaining it to her. I need you to sit with that for a second before you say anything else." Denise's face crumpled slightly at that, the first real crack in her defensiveness since the kitchen had filled up around us. "I'm not going to pretend this doesn't matter, because it does," I continued. "You can plan a photo any way you want. You cannot plan a photo that erases my daughter because her medical equipment doesn't match a color scheme. If she's not in the photo, there is no photo. Not this year, not any year going forward, not while I have anything to say about it." "Vanessa," Denise started. "I'm not finished," I said, and I watched her stop, genuinely, the way people stop when they realize the conversation isn't actually theirs to redirect anymore. "You've been planning this family's holidays for years, and I've gone along with a lot of things I found a little much, because it wasn't worth the fight. This isn't one of those things. This is my daughter's dignity, and I am not going along with it, quietly or otherwise." What happened next, I think, surprised almost everyone in that kitchen, myself included. Sarah, who'd been standing quietly through most of this, spoke up again. "I'd be glad to take the photo," she said, "with everyone, exactly as they are. I actually think it'll be a better picture. The best family photos I've ever taken are the ones where nobody's trying to look like something they're not." Gary, my uncle, who'd said nothing through most of the conversation, cleared his throat. "I think that's right," he said. "I think we should just take the picture. All of us. However we actually look." Denise, to her credit, and I want to be fair about this part, because I think it matters, didn't dig in further. She stood there for a long moment, visibly working through something, before she said, quietly, "You're right. I wasn't thinking about it the way I should have been. Can we just take the photo? All of us?" The photo that Sarah took that day, the one that actually hangs on Denise's wall now, includes Lily front and center, her purple hearing aids clearly visible, her hand mid-sign toward her cousin Maya beside her, both of them laughing at something only they'd fully caught. It is, by every account I've heard since, considered the best family photo Denise has ever hung. Denise found me again later that afternoon, after dinner, while the kids were scattered through the house in the specific post-meal chaos of a large family gathering. "I want to explain something," she said, "not to excuse it. Just to explain it." I told her I was willing to listen. "I think I've spent so many years trying to make these holidays look a certain way, perfect, put together, the kind of thing people compliment on the wall, that I stopped actually seeing the people in the photo as people. I was thinking about Lily as an element in a composition instead of as your daughter. I don't have a good excuse for that. I just think that's honestly what happened, and I'm ashamed of it." I appreciated the honesty, and I told her so. "I think that's probably true of a lot of what these gatherings have become for you," I said. "I don't think you're a cruel person, Denise. I think you got so focused on how something looks that you forgot to ask whether it was actually kind. Those aren't the same thing, and today, they weren't even close. I know, she said. I'm going to think about that for a long time. Before Sarah packed up her equipment that evening, she found me alone in the kitchen for a moment. I hope it's okay that I said something, she said. I don't usually get involved like that. But I have a nephew, like I said, and I've watched my sister go through versions of this conversation more times than I can count, well-meaning people who don't quite understand that exclusion dressed up as practicality is still exclusion. I couldn't stand there and photograph it happening. I told her it was more than okay. I told her it might have been the single most important thing that happened that day, that without her willingness to say something out loud, in that specific moment, I don't know how quickly the rest of the room would have understood the full weight of what Denise had actually said. Kids like your daughter are watching everything, Sarah said. Even when we think they can't hear us, they're reading the room in ways we don't always give them credit for. I just didn't want her reading a room that told her she didn't belong in her own family's picture. I think about that sentence often, still. That night, once Lily was asleep, Ryan and I sat on our back porch for a long time, going back over the day together. I keep thinking about how fast I moved to stand next to you both, he said, the second I read the room. I wasn't even sure yet what had happened. I just knew, whatever it was, I needed to be standing there. I don't know why it took me that long to get inside from the yard. You weren't slow, I told him. You came in the moment it mattered. That's what counts. I keep thinking about Lily's question, too, he said. Because of my ears? I don't think I've fully sat with that yet. She's 7. She shouldn't have to ask that question about her own family. I told him I'd been sitting with the same thing all afternoon, unable to fully set it down. I think the hardest part, I said, isn't even what Denise said. It's that Lily already had the instinct to ask that specific question, like some part of her has been quietly bracing for it for a while, even before today. Ryan was quiet for a long moment. I don't want her bracing for things, he said finally. I want her walking into rooms assuming she belongs in them, the same way I get to. Today didn't help with that, I said. But I think how the rest of the day went might. I think it matters that she watched grown-ups actually fix it, instead of just letting it happen. The following Thanksgiving, a full year later, Denise didn't send around a color palette weeks in advance. She didn't hire the same elaborate photography setup. Instead, she asked Lily, directly, what colors she liked, and built the loose suggestion for everyone's outfits around Lily's answer, a soft yellow, it turned out, because Lily had recently decided yellow was her favorite color that year, the way 7-year-olds' favorite colors tend to shift with the season. It was a small gesture, and I don't think it undid what had happened the year before. But I noticed it, and I think Denise meant for me to notice it, a quiet, specific acknowledgement that she'd carried the previous year's conversation with her longer than a single afternoon of embarrassment. Lily, now 8, doesn't remember the specific details of that Thanksgiving the way I do. She was 7, and children hold on to different things than adults do from the same event. What she remembers, when I've asked her since, is that Sarah let her look through the camera during the photo session, showed her how the settings worked, called her a natural in a way that made her glow for the rest of the day. I've made a specific choice not to tell her the full story of what almost happened that morning, at least not yet. I think, someday, when she's older, I'll tell her the whole thing, what Denise said, what Sarah did, what it meant that a stranger stood up for her before most of her own family found the words to. For now, I've let her keep the version of that day she actually remembers, the one where she got to look through a camera and someone called her a natural. A few weeks after that Thanksgiving, at a routine check-in with Lily's teacher at her school for the deaf, I found myself, somewhat unexpectedly, telling the story in full for the first time to someone outside my immediate family. Her teacher, Ms. Okafor, listened carefully, the way I imagine she listens to a lot of parents processing similar moments, and then said something that stayed with me. This happens more than families realize, she said. Not always this explicitly, but the underlying assumption, that a deaf child's visible difference is something to manage or minimize rather than simply include, shows up in 100 smaller ways long before anyone says something as direct as what your aunt said. I'm honestly glad it got said plainly. Plain versions are easier to actually address than the quiet ones that never get named. I asked her if she had advice for how to talk to Lily about it, going forward, as she got older and started asking more specific questions about that day. Let her lead, Ms. Okafor said. She'll ask what she's ready to know, when she's ready to know it. Your job isn't to protect her from the fact that this happened. It's to make sure she understands, whenever she does ask, that the problem was never her ears. It was everyone else's failure to build room for them. That framing has stayed with me since, a way of holding the story that doesn't require shielding Lily from what happened forever, but also doesn't rush her toward understanding something before she's ready to carry it. People who hear this story sometimes expect a bigger rupture, a permanent estrangement from Denise, a dramatic cutting off of the family gathering itself. That's not what happened, and I think it's more honest to say so. What happened instead was smaller and, in its own way, more useful. A moment of real exclusion got named clearly, in front of the people who needed to hear it, by both me and, crucially, by someone entirely outside our family who had nothing to lose by staying silent and chose to speak up anyway. I think about Sarah often, a person I'd known for less than an hour before that Thanksgiving, who understood something in that kitchen that took my own family considerably longer to fully absorb, that kindness dressed up as practicality is still exclusion, and that a 7-year-old girl deserves to be seen exactly as she is, purple hearing aids and all, in every photo that claims to represent her family. I used to think the hardest part of raising a deaf child in a hearing family would be the practical things, the appointments, the technology, the language learning, the constant small accommodations most people never have to think about. I've since learned there's a different kind of hard, watching the people who are supposed to love her unconditionally sometimes need a stranger's voice, and a clear enough moment of confrontation, to remember that unconditional actually means unconditional, aesthetic preferences included. If there's a lesson in this, it's one I think about every time I look at that photo now hanging on Denise's wall, Lily front and center, mid-sign, laughing, exactly as she actually is rather than some edited, more convenient version of herself. Real belonging in a family isn't measured by how well someone fits the picture everyone else already had in mind. It's measured by whether the picture gets rebuilt, without hesitation, the moment it becomes clear that someone real doesn't fit inside it. My daughter didn't need to change anything about herself that morning. The photo needed to change to actually include her, and eventually, with the right people saying the right things at the right moment, it did. I don't know what would have happened that Thanksgiving without Sarah standing near that sliding door, willing to say something a stranger had no obligation to say. I like to think my family would have gotten there on their own, eventually. But I'm grateful, more than I can fully express, that we didn't have to find out how long eventually might have taken. This past Thanksgiving, 2 years after the original incident, I watched something happen that I think captures, better than anything else I could describe, how much had genuinely shifted since that first, difficult morning. Denise's youngest grandchild, a boy named Oliver, has recently been diagnosed with a mobility condition that requires him to use a walker for longer distances. When Denise began planning this year's photo, she called me, unprompted, before she'd finalized anything. I wanted to ask you something, she said. With Oliver's walker, I want to make sure we're building the shot around him properly this time, not just fitting him in around everyone else. Is there anything I should think about, from what you learned with Lily? I sat with that question for a moment, genuinely moved by it, before answering as honestly and helpfully as I could, practical suggestions about positioning, about not making his walker something to hide behind other family members, about asking Oliver himself, the way I'd learned to ask Lily, what would actually make him comfortable in the shot. The photo that resulted, when I saw it later that day, included Oliver front and center, one hand resting on his walker, unmistakably part of the picture rather than something worked around at its edges. Lily stood beside him, her purple hearing aids visible as always, the two of them the clearest evidence I have that a single hard conversation, 2 years earlier, had actually changed something lasting about how this family thought to include the people in it. I think, when Lily is older, and I finally tell her the full story of that Thanksgiving morning, the thing I want her to take from it isn't the pain of what Denise said. It's the specific, concrete evidence of what happened next, that a stranger who owed her nothing chose to speak up, that her own mother found the words when it mattered most, that an entire family's tradition changed direction because enough people, eventually, refused to let exclusion pass as practicality. I want her to know that being different in a room built for people who aren't like her will sometimes mean encountering people who see her difference as an inconvenience before they see her as a person. But I also want her to know, with the same certainty, that the right response to that is never to make herself smaller or quieter or easier to overlook. It's to expect the room to make space, the way it eventually did that morning, and to trust that the people who love her will do the work of rebuilding the picture, every single time, until making space simply becomes how things are done. I don't know what would have happened that Thanksgiving without Sarah standing near that sliding door. But I know what actually did happen, and I know that the photo hanging on Denise's wall now, and the one from this most recent Thanksgiving with Oliver front and center beside her, are the clearest proof I have that a family's picture can be rebuilt, again and again, to actually include everyone standing in the room. If you've ever watched someone you love get treated as an inconvenience instead of a person, and had to find the words to say so, I'd love to hear how you did it. Let me know in the comments. And if this story meant something to you, consider subscribing. There are more stories like this one coming every week.